worship service of the Unitarian Universalist Church of Riverside. Our opening hymn this morning is number 38, Morning Has Broken, from the Gray Hymnal. Feel free to sing as the Spirit moves you, but please only with a mask on. Please stand in body or spirit and join us in singing hymn number 38, Morning Has Broken.
Morning has broken like the first morning. Blackbird has spoken like the first bird. Praise for the singing, praise for the morning, praise for them springing fresh from the word. Sweet the rain's dew falls solid from heaven, like the first dew fall on the first grass. Praise for the sweetness of the wet garden, strong in completeness where God's feet pass. Mine is the sunlight, mine is the morning, born of the one light, evenings of play. Praise with elation, praise every morning, God's recreation of the new day.
Thank you for joining us here in person, and thank you for joining us remotely by Zoom, where we will continue live streaming and posting these services on our YouTube channel for our virtual attendees. I'm Grace Preuss, a member of the worship committee, and I will be your worship associate today. Other members of the worship committee you will hear from include Alec Peck, who will be singing our hymns, as well as giving our sermon today. We welcome you to join us this morning with an open mind and an open heart, and with muted electronic devices, please. We welcome all of you to our service, especially those of you who are searching for a spiritual home. Whether it's your first time in worship with us or your 100th time, we hope that you'll find here questions that stretch you, people to befriend you, and liberal values that invite you to join us in feeding your spirit and living your faith. So welcome. Welcome into this space of love, justice, compassion, fellowship, and worship. Although our doors are open, the pandemic is not over. So while we are in the sanctuary, please keep your masks on and socially distance. And now I invite you to sit back and take a slow, deep breath as we move into the worship hour. For our call to worship, you are welcome to read with me the mission statement of this church. Our mission is to foster a diverse religious community that celebrates life, affirms the individual, encourages spiritual growth and open thought, and works to advance social justice and environmental sustainability. Today's sermon will be given by UUCR member Alec Peck. Alec has been a practicing UU for 22 years and has a deep passion for the intellectual and spiritual challenges which arise from exploring the 6 sources of our living tradition. He was raised in a UU church, chosen by his father, raised Quaker, and mother, raised Jewish, but both humanist atheists in practice. In addition to his heritage, Alec has a personal love for Daoism and is now completing his PhD in natural science at UC Riverside, while serving as chair of the worship committee here at UUCR. Where did we all come from? What does it mean to be human? And what is the human place in the universe? How does our perception of the divine impact the practical life of people in our society? And what's up with all the snakes? These deeply fundamental questions and more are often found in the creation myths of the world's religions. Today, we give respect to the story of Nüwa, the snake goddess of humanity, whose legend became part of the founding roots of many East Asian philosophies and religions, like Daoism and Confucianism. The interpretation of religious values has strongly shaped the societal and governing structure in East Asia, just as we've seen here in the US. But the role of women in Chinese society through history has looked rather different than what Americans are used to. Even we Yuyus in the West can find our way by learning from Nüwa, the ultimate mother goddess of us all, as we explore the way through this neighboring faith. We have two lightings of sacred flames. The first is the occupied indigenous people's remembrance candle. The second is the lighting of our own chalice, the symbol of our faith. We walk upon the traditional territories of diverse and sovereign peoples, the original people of this land, who continue to cry out for justice and self-determination. This spot we occupy was first the sacred space of several groups of indigenous peoples, including the Cahuilla, the Cupeño, and the Serrano. We, the Universalist Unitarian Church of Riverside, light this sacred flame as the stewards of this sacred and holy place. We are blessed with a space and opportunity to strive to live our common principles, to bring justice, equity, and compassion into our daily lives, to resist all that threatens the earth and her people, and to be part of a world community with peace, liberty, and justice for all. Let these thoughts carry us forth as we journey and worship together. Today's reading of the chalice lighting is We Are a People of Beauty by Kimberly and Tom Zach Carlson. Recognizing the beauty around us and within us, in voice and in spirit, we gather to light our chalice. May we savor the beauty of our abundance and diversity, always cherishing one another and our earth. May we remember to inhale the lushness in life, knowing that we are a people of beauty. Thank you, Bill. We have a tradition at UUCR to welcome those who are visitors or perhaps returning after some time away. We know it can be uncomfortable to stand up and speak in front of others, and so I will now ask for a volunteer from someone who has been here for a while to tell us your name and how you found out about our church. We ask you to step close to the mic in the front and speak into it directly and clearly so everyone can hear. Do we have a volunteer this morning? Gentleman in the back.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Micah May, and I found this church while trying to, find out, my son wanted to explore spirituality a little bit. So we looked around, tried to find a church that embodied some of the values that I hold dear and that my wife holds dear, to try to, give him those lessons in life. And I just want to say that this is refreshing when you look at the world and see all the hate and anger and violence today. It's kind of nice to come here and just hear about, people wanting to love and care for each other. So thank you.
Thank you, Michael. And that's how it's done. So if you are new here or an old friend or a visitor, please raise your hand to stand and come up to the mic and speak. Do we have any speakers this morning?
Good morning. Hi, my name is Walt Russell. I've been here over the years for probably 35 years. I feel that I owe this church, and that's why I've returned to it. Because in my ageness, I have come into some money, and I used to be too tight to support the church. Now I can modestly support my old friend who brought me 2 real friends, 1 wife, and some lovely memories, and continues to bring me a wonderful place to come to see liberal and share liberal thought. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, Adam, is there anyone online who would like to introduce themselves? Okay, so thank you for that. And for any other new guests, please join us for socializing and coffee hour after the service. We'd love to chat with you out in the parish hall where you can find our visitors book. Please leave your name before you leave so that we know you were here, and leave your contact information if you'd like to know about upcoming events. For those online, the best way to get added to the mailing list is to email the church office at admin@uuchurchofriverside.org. Now there are a few announcements that we'd like to share. During the service, we will mention several websites, email addresses, and phone numbers. At the end of the service, we will leave up a slide with all of this information, and it is also available on our website. Due to the unpredictability of the COVID virus, the CDC encourages the use of prevention strategies, including masking in public, testing, and vaccinating. You can make an appointment at vaccine.ca.gov, or for more information and more options of vaccine locations, please go to covid19.ca.gov. Let's all take personal responsibility to protect ourselves and others. We are all in this together. So, please join us for our family barbecue on May 30th. Tickets are pre-sale only, $20 for adults, $12 for children 6 to 12, and free for children 5 and under. The 50/50 UUCR Maintenance Fund raffle. This raffle is a fun opportunity to contribute to the upkeep of our beautiful historical church. Raffle tickets will be sold for $5 each and put in a pot. A winning ticket will be selected from the pot at our summer barbecue on May 30th, and the proceeds will be split with 50% going toward the church designated maintenance fund and 50% to the raffle winner. Please see Robert Braun or Avery for details. I'm not sure if Avery's here today, so you can see me after the service. Thank you for your participation. Our hymn now is number 121, We'll Build a Land, from the Gray Hymnal. Feel free to sing as the Spirit moves you, but please with your masks on. Please stand and body your spirit and join us in singing number 121, We'll Build a Land.
We'll build a land where we find our place.
Sharing our stewardship. This portion of our service is to support our beloved historical church. This can be accomplished in several ways. In addition to the weekly collection, you may send your checks to the church address, which is shown here. You may contribute by PayPal using the QR code, which is on the code website and also in our newsletter. Stater Brothers Markets gives our church a rebate on Stater grocery cards, which we will have in church each Sunday. You get the full value, and the church also receives a percentage. Please donate as the Spirit moves you by whatever method works best for you. Thank you for your generosity. And to those who give of their time and their talent, thank you for your generous care and attention. Will our ushers now please come forward to receive the collection? Our next hymn is number 402, From You I Receive, from the Gray Hymnal. Please feel free to sing as the Spirit moves you, but with your masks on. Please stand and body your spirit and join us in singing hymn number 402, From You I Receive.
From you I receive, to you I give, together we share, from this we live.
From you I receive, to you I give, together we share, from this we live. From you I receive, to you I give, together we share, and from this we live.
Our meditation today is from stanza 8, A Tao Life, from the Tao Te Ching, and this is a responsive reading. I invite all of you in the audience to read the italicized lines with me. In dwelling, live close to the ground. In thinking, keep to the simple. In conflict, be fair and generous. In work, do what you enjoy. In family life, be completely present. Now let us pause for a moment of silence. Now, I would like to introduce Alec Peck, speaking to us on neighboring faiths, Nüwa, goddess of humanity.
Thank you, Grace. Give me one moment as I have a few slides I want to share, so that way, instead of just looking at me, I have some visual aids, as they say in the ed biz. I think for now it'll look the same, yes. Hopefully that looks a little familiar, good. Great, thank you, and good morning. So I love reading about mythology, especially myths about how things came to be. And who doesn't like a good origin story? I was inspired to talk about Chinese mythology recently when a YouTube video popped up on my recommendations about Pangu and Nüwa, two of the central figures in the ancient Chinese cosmological mythology. I was drawn to it partially because I've personally tried to apply a Daoist philosophy in my own life, and I found the ideas of dualism and the balanced natural elements to be a powerful and instructive way in my journey on the way. And although I have a deep respect for the East Asian philosophies, I still lack the cultural context to appreciate the nuances and subtler details. I have tried to do my diligent research and provide some of that context for you here, but I am still only a white American, respectfully paraphrasing the work which I found, which itself must be at least taken hand due to its translation into English. Thus, I'd like to encourage you to seek out some of the more authentic sources that I'm referencing, and perhaps, if it's interesting to you, look into it on your own. The video essay, which originally inspired me to give this sermon, was made by Xiran J. Zhao, shown here with her New York Times bestselling book, Iron Widow. Her video, Creation Stories in Ancient Mythology, is well worth a watch, and it's available on YouTube. Unfortunately, the authentic sources that she draws from are not in English, and English sources on the subject are few in number and actually only relatively recently published. I read primarily from these two books, Chinese Mythology, An Introduction by Anne Burrell, and The Handbook of Chinese Mythology by Li Huyang and Demin An, but also from a few additional websites which I'll mention along the way. As you use, we believe that each of the world's religions holds some part of the truth, and that the stories of the world can tell us something about ourselves, the people we commune with, and the world that we live in. There's a long history in the West of pursuing foreign beliefs with skepticism and disdain, but today we're going to seek to enrich ourselves by learning from Nüwa and the shamans who passed down her stories for millennia. We can learn from the cycles of history and the dynamic balance of yin and yang, and how our beliefs shape our society, which in turn shape our beliefs. Unlike the Abrahamic religions of the Middle East, the genesis of ancient East Asian folk religion predates the invention of writing, which only matured in East Asia around 3,000 years ago. Even then, spiritual myths were mainly communicated by oral tradition through shamans, who would tell these stories only in special rituals performed in old age and told only to the shaman's favorite students. The main written sources for regarding East Asian mythology, such as the Shanghai Jun, which is the classics of mountains and seas, and the Ju Xi, the songs of Ju, didn't come until the end of the Zhao dynasty and the Han dynasty, at which point the dominant philosophies and politics of the time often reinterpreted the myths from how they were probably understood a millennia before then. However, there is no central standard canon like the Quran for this mythology, and unlike the Greek tradition, there was no equivalent of Homer who compiled the oral traditions systematically. There are around 100 distinct ethnic groups spanning the 3 millennia of written Chinese history. And each with their own set of myths. Even within the Han ethnic group, which constitutes over 90% of East Asia, we can find varying accounts of Nüwa's origin and her role in populating the world with humans. Each tradition is understood as a different version of the same story, different ways to explore the mythical history of humanity's cosmic destiny. We can identify a few core ideas of ancient East Asian philosophy which underpin Daoism, Taoism, and Confucianism, and other philosophies from that region. Perhaps the most central concept in East Asian philosophy is that of dualism, represented by the iconic yin-yang symbol. Though only through the contrast of light and dark do we experience and appreciate the complex boundary where they meet. And within yin, we find the bubble of yang. Flying within yang is a core of yin. The dark yin energy is associated with calming sleep, the earth, growth, primordial intuition, nurturing feminine energy, the darkness of the womb, and the inner universe. The light yang energy is associated with the waking sun, the sky and heavens, creativity and creation, intellectual enlightenment, adventurous masculine energy, and the light and heat of the open world and the external universe. The soft, smooth darkness of the yin and the hard, rough brightness of yang appear in the smooth and rough stones that we place in our water chalice for joys and concerns. And life is a dynamic balance between passive and active, between contentness and restlessness. It is dynamic because the system is only stable when in motion. Only through a constant balancing dance can the cycle of time perpetuate. The dynamic dance of duality means that when the sun reaches its highest point, it will certainly begin to fall. And when the night has reached its darkest point, it can do nothing but brighten again. The same balancing act can be seen in the interplay between the 5 elements, Wu Xing. These elements do not fulfill the same functions as the chemical elements, nor do they function like the 4 natural elements seen in European paganism, although as a side note, there are 4 element-like systems which have been used in certain parts of East Asia. The 5 elements should not be understood as the basic constituent components which make up our physical world and the forces that move us. Rather, each element is symbolic, a representative example of the kinds of interactions and relationships that one finds in nature. Certainly, physical water interacts mainly through the elemental shui, the most yin, dark element, which flows downwards and inwards to find the lowest and most still state. But it can still have the firmness of metal element. And since water truly is the water of life, it induces the element of wood. The presence of any one element will induce or suppress other elements, perpetuating the cycle in a self-sustaining way. Just like the elements of Wuxing, much of East Asian mythology is heavy on symbolism, loose on interpretation, and is rarely taken as a literal historical account. This had perhaps always been the case throughout ancient East Asia, but it has certainly been true since the Eastern Zhou dynasty around 700 BCE. Most written accounts of ancient myths were scattered and fragmented as East Asian society became more humanist. Some scholars attribute this to the people becoming more pragmatic and straying away from the supernatural world in a time when Confucius and his followers were rising in popularity. One main effect of this shift is the rationalization and the historicization of many ancient myths. The 4-faced legendary Yellow Emperor, Huangdi, was rationalized around the year 500 BCE, interpreted to mean that, of course, Huangdi himself had only one face, but the fact that he sent his officials in all 4 directions to administer far and wide meant that is what gave him the name four-faced. The Chinese word for face has a homophone, which means direction. And so the myth was reinterpreted to be a little bit less literal. This playfulness with language is very common in East Asian spirituality. And even today, one can find buildings in China that have no fourth floor, since the word four sounds like the word for death. And the number 8 is widely considered lucky for its similar sound to prosper. The myth of Nüwa was historicized at this time, a trend which reinterprets cosmological myths as actually describing human historical events, with Nüwa being interpreted as a legendary human empress who, rather than mending the broken heavens, had suppressed a rebellion from one of her subordinate dukes. However, before we get to Nüwa herself, we must begin by setting the cosmological stage. One of the central questions presented in an ancient philosopher Young's text is, who shaped the body of Nüwa? For Nüwa was not the first deity in the universe. Essentially here they're asking, yes, Nüwa created humans, but who created Nüwa? Nüwa has the head of a human and the body of a giant serpent, which were seen as lesser forms of dragons. And her first great feat was creating humanity. But the universe and the primordial earth existed long before human came to walk upon it. Different East Asian cultures treat the beginning of the universe in a variety of ways, including a very agnostic approach, just positing that at some point the universe existed somehow in some kind of primordial state. The first mythical deity to appear in this early universe was Pangu. Interestingly, the myths of Nüwa actually predate the myths of Pangu in terms of written human history, meaning that those ancient philosophers developed their ideas of cosmology, that as they developed their ideas of cosmology, they theorized farther and farther back in time, as we are doing today in physics. One generally accepted version of Pangu's story goes that in the beginning, heaven and earth, light and dark, were in a chaotic yet formless state like a chicken's egg. Within this chaos, Pangu was born. After around 18,000 years of growth, the egg, or Pangu's eyes, somehow opened and unfolded. Seeing the formless chaos and knowing the values of yin and yang, Pangu used his body to separate the limpid and light parts of the universe to rise and become the heavens, while the turbid and heavy parts sank down and became the earth. As Pangu grew, he transformed both the world and himself to become more divine than heaven and more sacred than earth. He grew for another 18,000 years until, once in perfect harmony with both the heaven and earth, he transformed the world and himself one final time. When Pangu was dying, his body began to transform. His breath became the wind and clouds. His voice became thunder. His left eye became the sun. His right eye became the moon. His 4 limbs and trunk became the 4 extremities of the earth and the 5 mountains. His blood became the rivers, and his veins became the earth's canals. His flesh became the fields and soil. His hair and beard became the stars, and his skin and body hair became plants. His teeth and bones became precious metals and rocks. His semen and marrow became pearls and jade. His sweat became the rain and the dew, and the various insects on his body reacted with the wind and turned into the animals of the land. The gods of East Asian mythology seem to come from a multitude of sources, and some groups do not even attempt to explain where the gods came from at all. Some gods are born from other gods, sprang from an egg or some other object, or even from another god's corpse, or transformed from mud or monkeys. Nüwa's most common association is with her creation of humanity, though there are at least 10 other explanations for humanity's origins from ancient East Asia, including that the first humans were sown from seeds, were the shadows of deities, transformed from animals, transformed from plants. However, let's focus on a general version of the myth of how Nüwa created humans. In Ying Shao's writing, a Han author, Nüwa is described as the divine creatrix. In Han iconography, the goddess was shown with her attributes of a measuring rope and a pair of compasses. Nüwa was alone as she traveled the earth which had grown from Pangu. And as she saw her reflection, she was sad that there were no other creatures that were in her image. Nüwa kneaded the yellow earth and fashioned human beings from it, though she worked so feverishly that she did not have enough strength to finish her task. And so she drew up her cord in a furrow through the mud and lifted it out to make the human beings. Each drop which fell from the cord became a human just as beautiful as the ones which had been sculpted by hand. And yet, though they could not be distinguished, the rich aristocrats are the human beings who were made from the yellow earth, while the ordinary poor commoners are the human beings who are made from the cord's furrow. Nüwa then taught her humans how to pair up by sex to produce babies and then continue populating the earth. This all worked well and good for several generations until a great disaster ravages the earth and kills off almost all of humanity. In some versions of this myth, the disaster is induced by a great flood, sometimes by a war between gods for the status of the godhead, destroying one of the 4 ancient pillars which holds up the heavens, or perhaps when all 4 of the pillars are corrupted and collapse. In this event, the 9 regions of China split up, and the heavens are said that they could not cover all things uniformly, and the earth could not carry everything at once. Fires raged fiercely and could not be extinguished. Water rose in vast floods without abating. Fierce beasts devoured the people of Chuan. Violent birds seized the old and the weak with their talons. Then Nüwa smelted 5 stones of varying shades to mend the blue sky. She severed the feet of a giant turtle to support the 4 poles and killed the black dragon to save the region of Qi. Nüwa piled up the ashes from burnt reeds to dam the surging waters. The blue sky was mended, and now the colored clouds patched the blue sky. The 4 poles were set right, and the surging waters dried up, although the 2 poles to the west were shorter than the ones to the east, explaining why now the heavens slid from east to west. The fierce beasts died, and the people of Chuang lived. They bore Earth's square area on their backs and embraced the round sky. Ever since then, there have been no birds or beasts, insects or reptiles that do not sheath their claws or fangs and conceal their poisonous venom, and they no longer have rapacious hearts. For now the earth can once again be at calm. When one considers Nüwa's achievement, it knows only the bound of 9th heaven above and the limit of yellow clod below. She bears the emblem of the fortune of life and death. Silently, solemnly, she comes to rest below the high ancestor. Then, without displaying her achievements, without spreading her fame, she holds the secret of the way and the true person and follows the eternal nature of heaven and earth. Nüwa's final great feats, aiding the repopulation of humanity and establishing the ceremony of marriage, have been much more muddied and changed by interpretations and the intentional obfuscation on the part of certain patriarchal rulers. One version of this myth tells us that with so few humans alive after the Great Disaster, close relatives were forced to pair to make babies. Knowing that this was improper, the humans performed a variety of rituals and deduced that although it was certainly shameful to copulate with one's siblings, it simply had to be done. However, the fetuses which resulted were abnormal, just a spherical blob of flesh. Thus, Nüwa intervened and cut open the deformed flesh, and from each piece that fell from the abomination became a new human, and thus the earth was safely repopulated. Nüwa is then often paired with Fuxi, who is traditionally a demigod from another region, born after his mother stepped in the footprint of a deity. Nüwa and Fushi's marriage is functional, but is entirely functional for the purpose of helping establish order in a time of confusion. However, there is a separate myth about a brother and sister being the only survivors of a near extinction of humanity, usually caused by an act of revenge from Kuei, the storm god. Nüwa and Fushi are sometimes conflated with the sole surviving brother and sister, and there the rite of bonding and marriage is portrayed as shameful. Modern theorists believe that these myths could have been conflated intentionally during the Han Dynasty, as patriarchal Confucians sought to diminish the belief in a goddess which reveals the holiness, importance, and independence of women. East Asian society was structured matriarchally, exemplified and supported by this belief in a supreme creator goddess. When Nüwa made and remade the people of the world, there was not necessarily any predestiny to the way that their life would go, but we do see that there was some hidden divine explanation as to why people came to become part of their socioeconomic class, specifically their close connection to the goddess. However, that shifted in the few hundred years as the more balanced Taoist philosophies gave way to the more hierarchical principles of Confucianism, with the governing body of the Han Dynasty. However, even with the influences of Confucianism, Nüwa's lesson about the role of sex and sexuality maintained relevance in East Asian social structures. Without the intense shame connotations which Christians assign to sex that we're familiar with here in the West, sexuality in East Asia remained fairly egalitarian. Although it was expected, as a matter of family responsibility, to have children, it was not really expected that sexual behavior was limited to that context. Various forms of polyamory were widely acceptable, and sexual relationships outside of marriage were seen as recreational, which shouldn't take priority over your sexual responsibilities, but ultimately you can do whatever you want, and with little regard for gender of the pairings. Many ancient emperors have well-documented male concubines, which were considered just as legitimate as female concubines. Nüwa's myth also included giving a young woman the ability to prove that she wasn't engaged in an improper relationship. The daughters of Nüwa are the proud builders of humanity and the society who dictate the future generations. And today, Nüwa is still an important goddess in some regions. In Zhejiang County, in Hebei Province, there is a large temple called Wahuanggong, the palace of Emperor Nüwa. Nüwa is said to have patched the broken sky and created humans here in this county, and every year from February 15th to March 18th in the lunar calendar, people gather here to worship Nüwa, their so-called great-grandmother. March 15th is said to be Nüwa's birthday, and from the late afternoon on March 14th to the early morning of March 15th, the pilgrims sit in the yard and inside the palace, which is locally called Zuye, sitting during the night. Some sing sacred songs for Nüwa, some dance for her. By accompanying their great-grandmother during her birthday, they believe they will get Nüwa's blessing, and they all hope for children, health, safety, and happiness. Women often dance the Danjing Tiao, wherein a pole is carried over one's shoulders for their ancestors. This local folk dance is sometimes called Daoism, carrying flower baskets on shoulder. It is usually danced by women and passed on matrilineally. There's a local legend that explains the origin of the dance and the reason why only women can dance it. After Nüwa repaired the broken sky, she mistakenly reincarnated or transmigrated into a black dog. Her daughter missed her very much, but she did not know where her mother had gone. And so she made flower baskets and put them on her shoulders, and she traveled and danced in many places to look for her mother. At last she found her mother Nüwa and rescued her. Therefore, women imitate Nüwa's daughter and dance the Danjing Tao to worship and give sacrifice to Nüwa. As Confucianism rose in ancient East Asia, so too did patriarchal societies. We like to think that with the comparably short history of the West, that the so-called wheel of progress is always rolling forward. But we can see in China's history a reversal from the more egalitarian political structure to one where women were seen as unnatural leaders. So much human potential has been lost from women whose opportunities were preemptively torn away in the name of hierarchy. More generally, while Daoism emphasizes having a free-flowing spirit which moves with the cycle of nature, Confucianism emphasizes the need for hierarchy to separate yin and yang to bring order from chaos. For reasons beyond the purview of today's discussion, Confucians of the Han Dynasty and afterwards sought to diminish the role of women by tarnishing the legacy of Nüwa. Philosophers tried to rewrite her myths so that she needed Fuxi's help and that their marriage would bring shame to their copulation by implying that they were brother and sister. However, the contextual evidence for this version of the myth doesn't really match the interpretation. Not only do the myths of Nüwa's solo work as creatrix far predate Fuxi's myths, but Fuxi's establishment of marriage explicitly forbids interfamily marriage. There are many deities in the Chinese pantheon which are specifically genderless or of undeterminable gender, and so there were many attempts to claim that Nüwa was a male god all along, although this was never really pervaded into the Chinese culture in any serious way. In the very late years of East Asian mythology writing, we do see some stories of miraculous virginal births. However, these always seem to produce male offspring, and the idiomatic similarities seem to imply that there was at that point a very strong Christian influence on how to interpret ancient myth. Although there are fewer female goddesses in the pantheon than the male gods, the goddesses tend to have more important and cosmological roles. However, in some version of Nüwa and Fuxi's union, this is the end of an era for Nüwa's daughter, where the people knew only of their mothers, and for Fuxi's sons, an era where they knew only of their fathers. Filial piety is a core value in most East Asian philosophies, and we see this, and in this, we see why having a balance of role models and familial support is shown as the ideal path to a peaceful life. And yet, as mammals, it is only through the matrilineal line that we really propagate ourselves. In the grand scheme, it seems like humanity's survival may have been extremely lucky in an incredibly hostile universe. In the grand scheme, it seems like all life should be shockingly improbable. Could it be that the spirit of Nüwa has allowed us to keep going? The days of foot binding and corsets are not long gone, and now in our country, the bodily autonomy of the builders of humanity is under threat. Can the spirit of Nüwa connect us with the earth and remind us of our birthright to choose how we build our own family? Let us remember the gifts of Nüwa, goddess of humanity, who has brought to us for us, and let us never stop striving for a world community with peace, liberty, and justice for all. Thank you.
Thank you, Alec. Our closing hymn now is number 139, This Is My Song, from the Gray Hymnal. Please feel free to sing as the Spirit moves you, but again, please only with the mask on. Please stand again in body or spirit and join us in singing 139.
This is my song, O God of all the nations, a song of peace. but other lands have starlight too, and clover, and skies are everywhere as blue as mine. Oh, hear my song, now God of all the nations, a song of peace for their land and for mine.
Our benediction today is by John W. Brigham. Go your ways, answers to all things, yet seeking always the answer to one more thing than you know. Namaste, amen, and blessed be. Thank you, Alec, for sharing your valuable time and insights with us this morning. If there are those of you who would like to stay in the sanctuary for 10 to 15 minutes for questions or observations from the service, please remain in the sanctuary or online. Please also be aware that these comments will be posted online. For the rest of you, you are now welcome to adjourn into the parish hall.
One thing I did notice about Nüwa, as opposed to some of the Daoism that I first encountered in college, was that she actually put in a day full of work. In some of the Daoism I've run into, basically, it is old men get to sit back and be totally slack. The kids are working for them. They talk about Wu Wei, inaction, yin, and all of this lovely enlightened stuff where the old man makes one perfect little move and everything is held together. But he's got a whole bunch of relatives working for him. I always said, with Daoism, I'd like to see how well does it work when you're living by yourself and you're urban poor. I want to see, where the rubber hits the road, I want to see how well it works. But Nüwa, she's a working lady. She, you saw there were the tools of the trade, and you went about the simple basic, not high speed. You didn't try to put 16 hours into an 8-hour day, but she worked. And that I thought, and with that whole dragon thing sort of weaving into and out of everything, it was something that I really appreciated about that. So that's one thing that I noticed. I'd also heard that at some point there's certain brands of Daoism got shifted over and got mostly very interested in immortality and alchemy. I don't know when that happened or what might have fueled that, but the thing I really appreciated about this one is that she's got a work ethic.
Thank you, Bill. I'm probably not qualified to answer very many questions, so I hope that anyone else just has any observations that they'd like to share or thoughts that they thought of during the service. And I will read our message from the chat. A question from Lee. If I came across any indication about how the myths of Nüwa influenced the movement of women's rights in Asia today. I did see some information about this, yes. And right now, the attitude in terms of the role of women on a societal and economic level is once again seen in at least I'd say fairly, from what I've seen, fairly egalitarian in the sense that they do not have nearly as prescriptive of an idea as we're used to in terms of which genders are meant to belong to certain professions or certain specific roles. Although the Confucian idea of the male as the head of the family unit is incredibly pervasive now and has been for quite a long time, which led to those practices like foot binding. Again, those practices have been on their way out, although there is still a push for a more egalitarian society happening in China. Yeah, go ahead, Bill.
Did foot binding have that unfortunate same spread to it that in Africa you have FGM? Or was it a heavy pressure that was, did it come from the top down, or did it come from your fellow humans to, bind your feet and do that, from people in the same strata, grandmothers, grandpas? What was the pressure for them to do that? Was it the only way you could get a good marriage, or what?
It's a great question to think about, Bill, and I can only speculate. My experience from the West is going to be extremely colored in that my immediate thoughts are of beauty standards that we use here, but that's a very an interpretation which is colored by my experience of our culture, and so I don't know if I can answer that, but it's a good thing to think about.
It seems like the prevailing opinion is right now is that people from other cultures are not qualified to speak on behalf of other cultures. I tend not to agree with that sometimes, because research has been done by many people from other cultures about certain cultures, and they are sometimes more knowledgeable about it than the people coming from that specific culture. So that being said, I think whoever studies, has a background on certain topics, I think that they are actually qualified to speak, at least academically or intellectually or culturally, on that topic. I've heard a few things about foot binding though. So one of the themes is that a woman's foot in China ideally should look like a lotus petal, and it was an aesthetic. People thought that the smaller your feet were, the more attractive it was. And second one is more obvious, which is it was a way to control women. They were not able to walk quickly with these kind of bound feet, and it made them more submissive to the males.
Thank you, Grace, for sharing that with us. If there are no other comments, I think it's time to go socialize. Thank you for joining us today once again.